Good afternoon. Welcome to the HL7 Da Vinci Community Roundtable. Today's session is Jumpstart Your HL7 FHIR Implementation, Testing and Connectathons Demystified. My name is Alex Goss, and it is my pleasure to moderate today's Community Roundtable and to remind all of us that we engage in these forums under HL7's antitrust policies to ensure appropriate collaboration and information sharing. I'm going to be tag teaming slide advancement with my colleague. Thank you very much for that. And we can go ahead to the next slide. As a standard-setting organization, HL7 is committed to testing its standards and related specifications. Testing is a critical component of HL7's overall development methodology and provides feedback that offers key signals in the development process that informs next steps, such as an implementation guide readiness for ballot or for future enhancement opportunities. Testing increases industry assurances of the usability of an implementation guide and is open to all who are interested in participating. Today's session will help you understand the testing event referred to as a Connectathon. Our expert presenters, who are hands-on Connectathon leaders and participants, will outline why testing is important, the terms used in testing, and how testing events are organized and critical to implementation success. Their presentation will demystify who should be involved, the value of testing partnerships, what activities are planned, and how you can participate, and the key testing tools and resources available for your use. They will use their experience with the burden reduction implementation guides, think CMS 0057 prior authorization API, as the exemplar for today's overview of Connectathons. This timely overview will assist you in preparing for and participating in upcoming Connectathons held by HL7 and others such as CMS. Our presenters include Jeff Brown, Healthcare Standards Advisor, Lantana Consulting Group, Michael Gould, Assistant Vice President, Interoperability Strategy at ZOmega, and Kyle Johnson, Software Developer at Epic. We certainly have time for Q&A session, which will happen after our presenters deliver their material. But we encourage you to use the question function in the Zoom platform throughout today's event to submit your questions. So let's go to the next slide, please. And you can use this Q&A box, as you can see on the screen, to submit your questions. We do have the lines are muted to aid the recording quality as we plan to submit the slides and the recording onto our Confluence page so that you would be able to access those. Throughout today's webinar, Leslie Amoros will be posting links in the chat box to assist in locating the Confluence page and other resources you may find of interest. On the next slide, we'll be able to highlight that we'll be off cycle for our next community roundtable being held May 29th. We've elected to go on the 5th Wednesday of the month to avoid overlapping with the HL7 working group meeting being held in Dallas. Speaking of, let's go to the next slide and talk about some upcoming events. This includes Wheaties Spring Conference, which is all virtual, being held May 13th to the 16th. AHIP's 2024 conference in person in Vegas, June 11th to the 13th, and a CMS free Connectathon, July 16th through 18th, which is also virtual, and suggest you save the date as we're waiting for additional details for registration. HL7's key events in May include the Connectathon, May 18th and 19th in Dallas, at the same venue where the working group meeting will be held. Early bird registration for the Connectathon and the working group meeting are open and available to all through this Friday. So I encourage you, if you're going to attend, make sure you get those early bird rates. HL7's FHIR Dev Days will be handled June 10th through 13th in Minneapolis. All right, so we are now at the point where we're going to start into our Connectathon demystifying with Michael Gould coming on to kick us off along with his colleagues, Jeff Brown and Kyle Johnson. Over to you, Mike.
So thank you very much, Alex, and thank you, Jeff and Kyle, for joining me today. The important part about demystifying Connectathons is really that it's an opportunity for you at your organization, working with the partners that you work with in this interoperability ecosystem. It's an opportunity for you to really get started on specific initiatives that you might have within your own organization's portfolio. So it's really an opportunity today where we'll walk through how to test, how to participate in the Connectathon events to really get yourselves going on a continuum of development and testing and implementation and release. So testing lies on the path for how Da Vinci burden reduction FHIR implementation guides have moved from writing the guides, authoring the guides, to implementing solutions from them. The value of FHIR Connectathons is enhanced by building key testing partnerships, strengthening and establishing and strengthening basic connectivity, and incrementally testing to what we hope are successful end-to-end flows. The challenge facing those that are launching FHIR solutions is really to find ways to implement standards with multiple invested stakeholders. Some are seen as adversaries in some cases. Others are seen as competitors. You may not know where some of them really lie on a spectrum, but it's an opportunity to collaborate, find out more about others that are in the ecosystem and the solutions that are needed, and implement them so you can measure their impact. With the aims and aspirations of standards and scalability, the essential element is going back to building a coalition of the willing. This coalition depends on collaboration among payers and providers primarily, often not an eagerly entered into or frictionless partnership. But the collaboration may often form along the dimensions of geographic markets, where facility locations align with particular payer business. Thinking more broadly, though, scaling interoperability also requires mutual alignment on the technical abilities with FHIR and related supporting technologies for both payers and providers. For example, connecting smart on FHIR apps and FHIR APIs and ensuring the appropriate security and identity aspects are included as well. Resource availability is also an essential element that requires planning, requires prioritization of the individual organization's efforts and objectives, as well as the interoperability efforts that call into play at least two organizations, if not more, coming to agreement on how they'll work together on a combined effort. Scaling interoperability also demands that any single provider-payer relationship not be a limiting factor, that we work together to extend the partnership from that one-to-one or point-to-point relationship so that any single provider can connect with many or all of the payers that are relevant to them. And conversely, that any single payer can connect with the many or all of the providers that interact with them as well. There's economies of scale that can be leveraged as well. So that first foray into doing this is something that the benefits, the learning, and the experience that come with it redound to subsequent connections and implementations. Collaboration among providers and payers and HIT vendors is really the seedbed for implementing and maturing FHIR interoperability. The FHIR maturity cycle often starts with the discovery of a use case. So starting kind of at the top left here, the discovery of a use case that kicks off an initial version of a FHIR implementation guide or set of implementation guides. And then moving clockwise, the implementation guide will lead to the building of a reference implementation directly from that implementation guide, and then several other implementers using the guide to produce their instances of an implementation, and then bringing these together to test them to see how they interact. Roughly, how an app might interact with an API. These are tested with other partners outside of and at Connectathon events, with findings that feed into refining the implementation guide and leading to new versions of that guide. So we'll speak more as we go through this today, how important it is to do preparation before a Connectathon event, but then also making the most of the Connectathon event when you attend it. So this cycle can repeat to a point where the implementation guide and the actual implementations normalize when several production implementations have been adopted and successfully meet the needs of the original use case. Accomplishing the testing of implementation guides is not automatic. It takes commitment that bears fruit in organizations acquiring the necessary capabilities for interoperability. Essential elements in building these capabilities through the testing flow include building the relationships with other testing partners, both those in complementary roles or in the same role as your organization. Because we're talking about interoperability, it's really important to know what the requesting side of transactions needs, or what the responding side of a transaction needs. And also learning from other organizations that are performing the same role as you are is a great way to mature your capabilities as well as those of the broader community. Establishing connectivity includes steps like certificate security, registering apps, and verifying the connection. From time to time, different organizations may have maintenance windows where the basic connectivity might be interrupted. So making sure that you go back and check those, assumptions of things that are really basic becomes important. And having the communication channels with each other is really important to do that quickly and effectively, so you can continue to make progress in the areas that really do matter. From that point of connectivity, translating the high-level purpose for partnering into specific test plans and test steps is the next step that happens. And this can be aligned with the purposes of the partnership, and also with the needs of the Connectathon, focused on testing and refining that specific FHIR implementation guide or guides. After completing initial and subsequent cycles of testing, evaluating the results and the overall experience is really important, and ensures that your efforts are valuable, both to you and to others that are participating, and that people are learning and can plan for future events and efforts. While Connectathon testing has been valuable, it's just a start. Conformance in terms of conformance to the FHIR implementation guides is necessary to get prototypes started on the right path and make the initial point to testing successful. As we go deeper into interoperability, more product level testing and more testing with partners really starts to take us down the road of scalability and opportunities for external or third-party validation of what we're working on that can lead to certification or accreditation. But even short of certification and accreditation, having multiple test partners and getting that external or third-party validation of what you're testing, that it actually is working, builds confidence, not just in your own on your own team, but also in the community, that we're headed in the right direction, that the preparation that we've done in writing guides and setting up the initial connections between partners, that it's really worth it and that we're going down the right path. The real value lies in the interoperability of production implementations as well, so that a scenario of monitoring and recertifying products is something that won't be too far off in the future. So after years of developing and specifying standards, in 2024, we're starting to see an inflection point within a time frame that I'll loosely call the year of implementation. For those of us that have been doing this for a while, it's been really in the early adopter phase, and now, particularly with federal regulations from CMS, we're starting to see greater motivation to adopt this and to get into production and production-ready systems. So providers and payers and HIT vendors are now at this inflection point for getting systems into production. Early adopters that have already built FHIR capabilities are production ready, and with wider adoption and production implementations, a future of success really lies out in front of us. And the efforts that many have put into this work thus far have also made a foundation of regulation as something that sets realistic and achievable goals, that what's in regulation is not something that somebody just pulled out of a hat. It's the product of the effort of many in the industry, demonstrating that what we're headed toward is achievable. So we'll also see greater differentiation that will realize improvements in healthcare and the processes of delivering care, and the ability to measure return on investment in standards and the testing that have gotten us to this point. So at this point, I'm going to hand off to Jeff, who's going to take us through a bit more specific view into the Connectathon experience.
Thank you, Mike. Really appreciate those great slides. That was a lot of good information, and it really builds well toward a more detailed view. So I go back to that Connectathon flow, or the testing flow that you had earlier, to pull out a few pieces that relate specifically to the organization of a Connectathon and the preparation and the actual execution for that Connectathon. So if you're not already aware, for the burden reduction track in Da Vinci, I'm the track lead. I work with these two great gentlemen on the track, and get to enjoy their great company during these times. But on the one particular piece of the flow called Identify Potential Partners and Initiate Relationships that Mike was pointing out, I like to look at this as identify and align. Okay, from a track lead perspective, when you're trying to organize this, when you're trying to envision what the Connectathon track will be for testing, you have to identify and align. And what that really means in this context is that identify the testing requirements. I mean, such things as the fundamental pieces of functionality that are the requirements of the implementation guides themselves. So whatever track you happen to want to participate in, there's going to be a lot of variety. There's going to be a lot of functional differences. Obviously, the use cases are going to be usually very different, but oftentimes complementary or overlapping with others. So you have to identify those specific requirements which may be quite broad or may be very focused in scope, depending on the track that you're involved in. You also have to identify the healthcare players. And this would be those provider organizations, the payer organizations, third-party developers, EHR vendors, all participants within this space are valuable contributors to the process of a connectathon and what we get out of the connectathon. And we'll dig more into that as we go forward. But we also have to identify regulatory emphasis. And what that really means is, are there regulatory mandates or requirement of specific implementation guides? Some may not be there yet. Some may already have these requirements in place, but they are obviously a strong factor in how we approach these testing requirements that we're trying to identify for the first step. Also, we have to align. We have to align the interested parties. We have to align those that are showing interest, those that have specific work goals toward either small pieces of the functionality or the broad scope of the entire use case. It could be a variation or a combination thereof. So you have to align these parties with the information that's available. Okay, so what are the implementation guides, the core implementation guides, any dependencies of implementation guides, supporting technology dependencies, and so anything that supports that has to be used. You have to align these potential players with that. In other words, help educate the community as a whole, for those that are just becoming familiar with it, all the way to those that are deep in the weeds and have been for some time. But there's a community of expectations around these use cases. So any specialized designs, we have to align with those specialized focus and designs that implementation guides may impose on us. And any restrictions which may be internal to the guide or external through the larger healthcare community and broad scope of regulatory compliance. Okay, and then we move on to the established connectivity, which the points that Mike made were so spot on from a technical and more track lead perspective. I see this as the phase of designing a plan. And this is basically just process of communication for preparation. Okay, so how do you communicate with the players and the participants within a communication mechanism or a proper channel for this communication, which can vary, and I'll get into that a little bit more. But we want to document the scenarios for testing, okay, because we want to make sure that we have a clear view of what we're trying to, in a very granular form, test out and expand and surface if there's any issues or successes that we may have. We also, during this phase, need to validate any connectivity requirements, make sure that we have the connections between not only people, but technologies. And the planning here is what I would consider very iterative and inclusive. And what I mean by that is it's very iterative in that we go through this and work through processes for developing and finalizing scenarios, but then we loop back around and revisit these and try to advance them and make them even more productive as we go forward. And remember, this is all in the preparation stage. Inclusive in the fact that we're trying to make sure that we get as much input from the community, those that are actually going to be in the weeds testing with us. This is so crucial because this is where the implementations take place. Okay, and then after this, we actually do the conduct testing phase, which, as it may sound like, is we're actually executing the plan. So as we went through and identified and aligned, we designed the plan, and now we're actually executing the plan. And so this is what all the planning and preparation that we've done leading up to the Connectathon is all about. So we get to the Connectathon, whether it's a virtual event or whether it's the more standard in-person event. There's a lot of preparation that goes into it, when you get on site or on a virtual site, either one, and actually have to coordinate between the tracks, a lot of logistics that have to be talked about, but I'll get more into that as we move through the slides. So next slide. So as I was talking more about this particular identify and align for this particular partnerships and relationships piece of it, this is where the community involvement really has to begin. And that is typically through our public use case calls. Okay. Almost every single track you see will be easily found as a weekly or biweekly or some type of cadence call where the community as a whole, the public as a whole, comes together. Those with a strong interest in the advancement of these use cases will come together to talk, to discuss the issues, to help build out the implementation guides with the expertise from all corners of the industry. So again, this identifying piece is we're finding the starting point for interested parties to participate. Again, it's public use case calls is the single best place to start. Okay, but it is not the only place to start. There's communication with colleagues. There's outreach to those within the industry that are involved. I mean, those of you that are on here could reach out to any one of us, and we would be able to either help you ourselves or direct you to the broader community for involvement. So it's important to understand that these opportunities are available for you, and we encourage input from everyone. So every voice should be heard. So if you have something to say to us on this, we encourage that vocal outreach to us. It's a common interest networking available for everyone to join into. It develops partnerships specifically toward the Connectathon, but sometimes it grows beyond that. But the ultimate goal is to advance the healthcare standards that we're working on. And this is where we have a forum for contributing to the IG improvements themselves. So this really provides that venue for everyone to come together. Now, the next point I have on this slide is convene regular participant gatherings. And this comes back to the communication piece that I spoke of earlier. While different tracks have different needs, they're of different sizes, they're all valuable. And those differences between them sometimes call for different communication channels. I speak directly to the one that I'm over, which is the Da Vinci burden reduction track and use cases. And we have a lot of participants. It's very enjoyable that way, that we have so many voices involved. But what it does is it allows us to have regular participant gatherings. So I call it this because any track can do this. Any track is available to have the contributors reach out and either have email channels or have some type of offline discussions that go on, through Zulip or other tools available. But you can also have the common meetings. This is great to have, and I know from burden reduction, we have a very focused and specific meeting just for those that are interested in testing the use cases, because what this allows us to do is have a very specific goal in mind of achieving the preparation needs for the Connectathon going forward. It also really does allow us to keep that momentum going. So if we just stopped after the end of a Connectathon and sent a few emails along the way and hope to get things going and then get to the next Connectathon, it can be done, but it's more efficient and it's really more productive to keep that momentum going. Get the excitement and what we've learned from one Connectathon and move to the next. So if you'll move on to the next slide. One of the key pieces to us having this move forward and have a common area for communication outside of any call is the burden reduction track page for our particular track. But as you'll see down the left of this screenshot we have here, this lists all of the tracks. So you have the ability to go out to this Confluence page and look at all the tracks that are going to be at a particular Connectathon. That can vary from Connectathon to Connectathon, but you go to the current one and you can pick whichever one, and each track page will have the relevant and important information for you to continue your journey to attend and be involved in these events. As I'm showing here, this is the top of our burden reduction track page. There's a lot of information here. You're only seeing the top part of it, but it will have explanations about what the track is all about. You will have information about where to go for submitting tickets if you get to that point. What we're trying to accomplish, goals, any utilities or tools that are available. And then also we like to keep on there an active running test scenario section going so that people can see what we're planning on and refining as we go forward through this process. So if you'll go to the next slide. So this established connectivity, the designing a plan, as I like to call it. As I mentioned, in burden reduction, we have regular Connectathon planning meetings. So each track can do what they wish in this channel of communication, but we have found that regular Connectathon planning meetings, which is weekly right now, we can actually all come together, discuss where we're at, refine the steps we have, identify new partners in testing, coming on board all the time, and try to work them into scenarios, identify what available functionality and the interests are. You know, so some work is being focused in small areas of a larger use case probably, and we want to work them in because testing is testing is testing. We want to be able to document these exchange scenarios, the actors, the roles, what the expectations are for it, as specific as we can be. Because remember, this is all in the preparation phase. We're trying to actually get this information out there so that we all have it available. Not only those of us that are testing, but anyone that's interested in seeing it. We want to be able to prepare and validate any connectivity requirements leading up to the Connectathon. This is another benefit of having these regular meetings, is that we can start discussing if there's an issue connecting to this particular server over here that this participant is offering up to do a service, or this one, or if there's any credentials, or if there's been an issue with some kind of certificate or anything along these lines. We want to get these things ironed out early. Okay, because that's going to be critical. It helps us be more efficient. And what I have found over the last few years of doing this for burden reduction is that it develops a very cohesive team, especially of those of us that are there every single time. And while it's not a requirement to be there every single time, it's really nice when we have that commitment and that involvement, because we all get to know each other and what we're working on and what our goals are. And it's all a very common goal. While we have different organizations involved, we all have this common goal of trying to achieve that interoperability around use cases, leveraging specific implementation guides. Next. And then, of course, that gathering together to execute the plan. Okay, this is the actual Connectathon itself. So after we've done all these other steps of walking through and, you know, doing the identification of who the testing partners are going to be and defining what scenarios of testing, we arrive prepared to hit the ground running. And that's something that I like to always tell everyone, because the benefits of preparation ahead of time is invaluable. And you get there and you feel comfortable, you feel ready to go. For those of you that have not ever attended a Connectathon, there's typically, like if you're in person one especially, there'll be some introductory remarks on that first Saturday that we're there. And everyone's seated at their tables and we're all ready to get going. And then when the opening remarks are done, they say, well, get to the testing, and everybody takes off. If we did not do all these previous steps, what we would find is that we are saying, okay, now we're here. What are we going to test? Who's going to test with whom? You can imagine how much time could be lost doing that. So we hit the ground running. So as soon as they say get to it, we just dive in. And the great thing is that we can have, if your track and use cases need it, you can actually run in parallel. And burden reduction does that. We have a lot of different different threads going at the same time, little test scenarios going at the same time. Remember, burden reduction has 3 implementation guides that it is comprised of, and within that we have different pieces of functionality across the board and a lot of extra pieces of technology being involved. So we identify several scenarios that get tested in parallel, and any track can do that if they wish, or if the need is there, or they can test sequentially. Each track can be very different in that, but that's how we handle it in burden reduction. The great thing is that we can surface implementation guide issues, because we can put things into a document as it looks good to us, everybody agrees on it. But when you finally get the rubber hitting the road, as they say, and start testing these, that's when you find out where the issues are. And it's iterative, it's interactive, it's on the spot. And I always have heard this, and I love this, is that failure can be an option. And that should not sound negative, because if there is going to be issues, an issue or a problem that is surfaced, which is inevitable. This is very technical and very complicated pieces of technology that we're working with and trying to develop to work out these complicated use cases. So there's going to be issues. This is where we want to surface those. This is where we want to begin the process of addressing them. Not all are fixed at the Connectathon, but sometimes they can be. If it requires an implementation guide change, then at least that can be documented and moved forward. So there's a lot of learning, a lot of advancement of all the implementation guides that we're working with. So the basic flow is just as I showed from a track perspective. The implementers are able to dig in, and I work with such a great set of Kyle and Mike are all on the burn reduction track as well. And everyone is such a good cohesive team. It's great. So next slide.
And Jeff, if I could just jump in for a moment, when you mentioned about failure, one of the things about the Connectathon that we might have glossed over is that it's typically a 2-day event, a Saturday and a Sunday. So when you get there and you're in person, you really want to use that time when you're in person to, tackle interactively the tough things about interoperability. And those tough things can, be failure points sometimes that take some iterative working through. So that's why doing the preparation on what may seem like the easy parts before you get to the Connectathon is important, so that you can put the hours that you have together to good use on things that are more challenging.
Well put, Mike. And now I would like to turn it over to Kyle Johnson of Epic.
All right. Howdy,
Thanks,
folks.
Kyle, for indulging me too.
Yeah, I also wanted to throw in a comment on that last section. So just in terms of expectations of the different Connectathon tracks. So burn reduction is one of the larger ones because of, CMS 0057 saying that you have to implement these guides by 2027. So on our prep call earlier today, for example, there were 20 people on the line making plans for how they were going to test. Some of the tracks are a lot smaller, more like, 5 people. So it's definitely worth hopping on those weekly Da Vinci calls to try to, find out who the partners are and, what level of engagement there's going to be. Yeah, so the part I'm planning to present is more of, for an individual implementer coming to test things. What are the basics you need to understand? What are some tips to get value out of it and what to expect while you're actually there? A lot of this content is based on the first time attendee video, which you'll definitely want to check out if you're coming. It's 3.5 hours. It gets into a lot of details. I'm just going to do the quick high level version of it. So yeah, when you're first learning about FHIR, I wanted to call out, this is from the main index page, sort of showing what FHIR is. It's basically this, these are the FHIR resources, and these are basically the building blocks that build up to represent data in the healthcare industry. At the lowest level, it's very technical, getting into JSON and data types. As you go up, it gets higher level into things like code systems and value sets, defining, what the possible values for data are for each particular element. Things like REST APIs and operations. You go up a level from that, you've got very common things like patient. Everybody should be familiar with what a patient is. If you click into that resource, you can also see the maturity of it. At this point, it's normative, which means, we're confident in this. It's been tested at Connectathons. It's been tested in production. It's probably not changing. Whereas if you go a further level up to more of the financial concepts like claim and coverage, which are things that have not received nearly as much testing and are kind of getting fleshed out as a part of the burden reduction efforts, you'll see their maturity is more like trial use, where, that basic structure of the data is there, but it still might change as we grow and learn things and figure out what we need to change. Recent example is for coverage. Some people at Connectathon had interpreted where the member ID needs to go differently. So we ran into issues that became a JIRA ticket to clarify it in CRD so that the profile has a discrete place. And then going forward, we haven't run into that issue, which is great to figure out during Connectathon testing instead of having to figure it out when you're trying to go live in production. You can go to the next slide. So when you click into one of these profiles, I grabbed service request here as an example. You're going to see a mix of both this narrative content that describes how it's used and where it fits into the overall flow, how it relates to other FHIR resources. And then there's the view of the actual resource content. So just to give a quick overview of this, you'll see all the different fields, the cardinality there. So 0 ... star means that there's 0 to many of that element. So a service request, which is basically an order that a clinician has placed. You can see status has a 1 ... There's always a status. The type of it is a code, and it's a discrete value from that fixed list. So if someone's in the process of signing an order, that service request would come through with a status of draft. If it's already been signed and is waiting for scheduling or waiting to be performed, it would have a status of active. And you can go through all the different profiles in FHIR and see, that basic structure of this is what healthcare data should look like. And like the underlying data is going to be different for different EHRs, different vendors, et cetera. But we normalize it into these FHIR resources to be able to interoperate. Next slide. One important thing I wanted to call out is US core. So this is very relevant for burden reduction, which is mostly US focused. ONC, the Office of the National Coordinator for Health IT, puts out these requirements for, this is the minimum set of interoperable data you have to support. It's called US CDI, US Core Data. Oh, can I remember this?
Core data for interoperability.
Thank you, Alex. Yeah, so we've been on V1 of that for a long time. It just recently went up to V3. And it's basically just a list of concepts and elements that need to be supported. It doesn't get into the technical stuff. For that, we have to go look at the US core profiles. Now, a profile is built on top of a FHIR resource. It adds additional constraints and extensions to make it suitable for a use case. So US core here has modified service request. And an example I wanted to call out was that USCDI recently added procedures.reason for referral. And the way US core achieves that is the service requests.reason. So the reason it's good to understand US core is that EHRs have to certify to US core. So if you're a vendor that's trying to consume a FHIR API, you can expect it to be conformant to US Core 3.1.1 currently. And then as of 2026, it's going to be conformant to US Core 6.1.0. So that's a good baseline to be aware of. And then next slide. There's also some technologies that are important to be aware of. So these are some that will come up all the time. Smart on FHIR launches. This is the way that your app can appear in an EHR. It sets up the authentication, the scopes and FHIR resources that are available to you. It gives you that token so that you can do your FHIR reads, your FHIR creates, your FHIR updates, whatever it may be. To use all of those resources from US Core. And depending on how the EHR is set up, this could be as seamless as your web app appears embedded in the clinician's workflow. And you get to have your own UI, you pull data as if you were part of the EHR. Yeah, so that's an important technology to be aware of. There's also sandboxes out there to be able to test this on your own. Okay, and next slide. The other common technology I wanted to call out was CDS hooks. That's clinical decision support. So this is a pretty common tech where if you want to be injected into a specific part of the workflow, the two most common ones right now are patient view. So that's when you go to view the chart, and order sign. So as part of the clinician signing an order. You can have it set up so that the EHR will call out to your service. It'll pass along an authentication token so that you can do your FHIR reads. It also has some context that's based on which hook. And then you have the ability to return, here's a card with some free text that I want to show to the clinician. So it could be information about the cost of a drug or suggestions of, hey, you should order this thing instead. Or a drug interaction warning, like do not place this order. Recently with CRD, we've also started using system actions in CDS hooks, which is a way to automatically file data right to the medical record without even having to show UI. Yeah. Let's see, let's go to the next slide. Okay, so then the next layer up on those basic tools are the actual implementation guides. So these are the things that describe, okay, how do I actually make use of those FHIR resources and those technologies to accomplish my use case? One example here was I grabbed a snippet from Da Vinci CRD, that's Coverage Requirements Discovery. So it adds additional requirements on top of that base technology. So for order sign, it says that the client and the server shall support the coverage information system action. So you'll see this conformance language of may, should, shall. There are other artifacts in the implementation guide too to be aware of, to be conformant with it. And there's usually a lot of narrative text in these implementation guides. CRD also defines its own profiles on top of US Core in the latest version. So here you can see that the CRD service request has added this coverage information extension. And then when you look into that, you can see, oh, this is where the service returns whether prior auth is required or not. So that's how we accomplish CRD's goal of, okay, as I'm signing an order, send it to the service, let it write back, is prior auth required for this thing that I'm trying to order? And then that automatically files because it's using system action, and the EHR gets to decide what to do with it. Let's go to the next slide. Okay, and then some tips for how to be effective and get value out of a Connectathon. So one thing I like to do is put together a document of the different scenarios that I'm hoping to test for that Connectathon. One thing I'll say is certain implementation guides are very broad in the amount of functionality they define. So sometimes it's good to be targeted and, that this is what was in scope for us. And then send request and response messages to partners. So it's very clear and obvious what it is we're trying to accomplish. I think for a lot of people, this is also helpful in that it's very straightforward to understand, if you support the scenario, or if you don't, what elements you'd need to add to make it work, which can be a lot more easily understood than reading the entire implementation guide. And then, maybe you both implement different parts of it and don't meet in the middle. Now, if you don't have your own example messages or a testing partner to send you this stuff, note a lot of implementation guides have their own examples already built into them. So it's good to make sure that those work. Additionally, depending on the track, there may be testing resources available. So for burden reduction, for example, there's both a reference implementation and several Aegis Touchstone testing scripts and example resources. So be sure to look at your track page and see what resources are available. There may be a whole lot there that can get your system up to snuff before you even try to come to the Connectathon. All right, next slide. So one thing I wanted to call out that has been a pretty big headache is if you come to the Connectathon and you're trying to figure out authentication for your endpoints, you can end up wasting a lot of time that isn't really focused on the implementation guide. So I've tested with many vendors, and I find it seems to vary for everyone. There's the different OAuth grant types with bearer tokens, client credentials, basic auth. It may involve a manual approval where you need to talk to someone to get a token. It may be, here's a sign into our secure email portal where you can go grab the script to run to get access. It's a lot of different ways that it happens. There may be issues where, oh, my server's not actually exposed to the extranet, and I didn't realize that until someone tried to test with me. Firewalls that block things. I've seen a smart app URL that it's the first time the firewall's seen it, so it thinks it's malware, and then that wastes time. There's variance in if there's signed JOTs and JKUs included for validating it. all that to say, it's important, try to exchange endpoints with partners ahead of time. Depending on the track, they may just be listed in Conman. Don't lose too much time in this authentication stuff if it's not the goal of what you're testing. I'll make the caveat, there have been recent discussions about UDAP and FAST trying to make authentication more scalable and easier to do. And those tracks are focused on trying to improve these sort of problems and is the focus of the testing. And I'm hoping the UDAP stuff goes well because that'll kind of lead into TEFCA and yeah. All right, next slide. So I wanted to call out, be ready to debug because you will run into issues. Set up your code to verbosely log what's happening. I'd say it's pretty often that we've been testing and we'll hit a server 500 error, and then someone needs to go in and add new logging and redeploy their site so that we can try to figure out, okay, what actually happened. Try to have that stuff available ahead of time so you can track down the issues more quickly. And then get your tools ready for whatever your technology may be. For me, it's Postman, or more recently Bruno, Fiddler, Chrome Dev Tools, because I'll be looking at the logs and saying, oh, I see my system was broken, or oh, I see your system was broken. Yeah, so that stuff's important. All right, next slide. All right, so when you're actually at the event, the experience for me has mostly been focused on testing. So I'll be, meeting with all the testing partners set up ahead of time, plus people I just run into ad hoc, doing that build, doing that testing, getting to the point of, okay, this is broken because X. Here's the error for you to run with and see if you can fix it while we're still here. And then moving on to the next group and doing the same thing. We'll find those issues in the implementations and improve them. We'll also find issues in the implementation guide where maybe something was written in an idyllic way that doesn't survive real life. There's also networking that happens, meeting up with a lot of people, a lot of design discussions. There's these breakout sessions that are more targeted discussions of ongoing topics. Like one I'll be interested in this upcoming Connectathon is the CQL discovery and discussions about a standard library. And then there's also a wrap up on Sunday where sometimes folks like to do demos of what they managed to get working. And there's also track report outs from everyone. So you can get a high level summary of what everyone accomplished. Yeah, and I wanted to include the rest of the group here. So let me ask, Mike, what's your experience at the Connectathon for more of a business, non-technical role?
So, I've for a long time been one of those that kind of has one foot in the technical and one foot in the non-technical side of things. So while it's challenging to, actually get my hands on as much as I'd like to, but it's also good to relate what developers are doing, what architects are doing, what the folks that have deep subject matter expertise on the data are doing to work together to make this all work. So it's really rewarding when you get to a point, it could be on Saturday or it could be on Sunday during the Connectathon event, and you actually see a request going from one side, one partner to the other partner, and the data or the response coming back. In terms of burden reduction, it could be, someone who's playing the role of a provider saying, do I need a prior auth for this item that I want to order for this patient who has this insurance? And doing that in a test system. Again, this is with simulated data. It's not PHI, but it's very rewarding after you've spent hours with your team getting the basics in place to see that that request can come over from the provider, the one playing the provider role, to the payer, and a response coming back from the payer saying, no, you don't need a prior auth, or yes, you do need a prior auth, and that that response back triggers something, even in an automated fashion, to start the subsequent interactions back and forth. Like in one of your earlier slides, you had the sequence diagram with the arrows going from left to right and right to left, showing how, okay, now that we know a prior auth is required, what's the next step, and what are the steps after that that lead up to a decision being made, hopefully that the authorization is granted, and seeing the pride of not just one team, but of several teams that are able to do this, sitting around a table and getting it across the finish line.
Nice. Yeah, I love to get those accomplishments at the end.
Mhm.
And even when we don't get those accomplishments, I'm still glad to have the issue trackers to follow up on.
Yes, because sometimes they could be more interesting than something that's more successful, let's say, because the the gauge of success is that you reach an expected outcome, right? And when something fails, you're finding something new that needs to be fixed. And depending on where you are and your approach to all this, that sometimes can be even more interesting.
Let me throw the same question your way, Jeff. What's your experience at the Connectathon as a track lead?
Well, I think there's a couple of things that really come to mind first. And I think primarily it is that, um, you know, as was mentioned a while ago, burden reduction is a very large track. And we have varying sizes throughout the Connectathon. If you go for the first time, you'll see all variations, but it's the aspect of trying to help facilitate all these testers, as Kyle was mentioning, it gets head down into testing and debugging, working through these scenarios. But as I mentioned before, we have multiple scenarios going at once, and trying to facilitate that. Uh, Even throughout a Connectathon where you have testers there, you still will have varying degrees of knowledge of the IGs, the implementation guides themselves, or FHIR specifically. So you'll have some that are like super knowledgeable, like Kyle himself, and others that maybe are still grasping at this as they're trying to get the development process going. And so it's helping in those roles as well. I think also the other thing that really stands out to me is that networking piece that you have there. While that sounds more like what you think of networking through other channels and communication between people and meeting new people and everything, and it is that, but it's also more than that, which is the collaboration between tracks. It's the collaboration between other parties and other participants that maybe are focused on one particular track but have interests and needs in others as well, and it's helping to get that communication going and that involvement worked out. So we're not working on an island here. We're working in a broader sea of tracks that's going on, and there's a lot of collaboration, overlap. And so I think it's really making sure to not miss those opportunities. That is critical for me as a track lead.
Excellent. Well, I think with that, I'll pass it on to Mike for our after Connectathon slide.
Sure, thanks. So one of the things that we have found in our experiences, and we hear it from others too, is that the Connectathons are great events, but with FHIR now having passed its 10th year in existence, it's becoming more apparent that having a continuous process of testing becomes more important, especially as providers and payers have systems in place now, production systems in place that are using FHIR. So it's a way to keep evolving your system, improving your systems that use FHIR. It's also a way, rather than doing a lot of hurry up and Herculean effort, let's say in the week before a Connectathon event that you've committed to, maybe to do one or two developers getting together for a 15-minute call over the course of a week or several weeks. So you kind of spread out the workload, and that opens the door to identifying specific things that need to be fixed, or like I mentioned, something fails, that's an opportunity to improve something. So the way that HL7 structures that is by using these JIRA tickets to track the request for something to be improved, and that's taken to the weekly calls that Jeff mentioned as well, and that Kyle and myself participate in regularly. That it's an opportunity to bring these items, these JIRA tickets that may be the start of an improvement, and bring them before the public community that participates, even folks that don't participate in Connectathons or haven't yet been to a Connectathon, that have the subject matter expertise in in this case burden reduction, that can then weigh in on how to resolve that issue. This is all part of how we mature the implementation guides. Kyle had mentioned in one of his first slides a reference to the patient resource. Well, that's a very common central aspect of healthcare data exchange, how you characterize a patient, and it's one that has evolved to a stable state because it's been tested. It's been tested. Tripping over my words here. It's
Extensively. Yeah.
Thank you. And it's something that people have banged on it a lot and said, okay, this is, something that is an attribute of what a patient is, and this is something that's not. And the same is true of several of the other resources that, Kyle also mentioned, like coverage when it comes to insurance, or what a healthcare encounter is. But things that are, pretty commonly agreed upon, like what a medication is, and what a result is. Those kinds of things, we find new ways of relating them that also, are part of the process of resolving things that people put into JIRA tickets. These JIRA tickets also feed into the balloting process.
I wanted to quick mention, if folks
go
aren't
ahead.
familiar with that term. So JIRA is our issue tracker that HL7 uses.
Mm-hmm.
So on any of the implementation guides, at the very bottom, there's a link to propose a change. So you can go ahead and click that, and it'll guide you through submitting issues that get worked on in those weekly calls.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks for adding that. So that's really a hands-on way of how to do that. The ballot process is HL7's working process for how to make changes to implementation guides and actually get the newer version of the implementation guide out there for public consumption and use to implement. And this all provides valuable experience for you and your team, and your other trading partners as well, for getting to implementing things in a production setting using real PHI, so that your organization can not just comply with regulations like we see with CMS and the interoperability, patient access, and prior auth rules, but also find new ways to improve your business, even beyond the floor of compliance. I'd invite, questions from the audience. I see we have a couple that have been submitted, but
Yeah.
also Jeff or Kyle, if you wanted to add anything else.
Yeah, on the JIRA tickets and that maturing and changing the IGs over time. I know a few examples come to mind. So when CMS 0057, the proposed rule, first came out, it recommended CRD version 1. And then a significant amount of design and testing went into that. And there were some major changes. One is previously it used to be cards that would be shown to the physician as kind of a interruptive thing where they'd have to read the free text and understand, no, this does not require prior auth, and then, maybe tell their billing office somehow. That got changed to system action, so it automatically files in the background and it could be handled by them or others. So that was a pretty significant workflow change that made it into CRD version 2. And then by the time CMS 0057, the final rule came out, it was recommending version 2. So that improved version of things was our baseline. There's also much smaller JIRA tickets, things like, the HCPCS system URL changed, things like that, that all, improve the guides over time.
And I can say from the perspective of not only the track lead, but as one who's developing one of the IGs and primary author of DTR, documentation, templates, and rules, that what Kyle's saying resonates so well with me, because while I'm there at a Connectathon, I'm observing what's taking place. I'm seeing the successes, seeing any issues that may be being worked on or being surfaced that will require more investigation later, and how that's coming from the thought processes that went into where the IG is at that point. And so it's a learning process for all of us at different in different stages and in different facets of the whole process. So implementation guides are truly advanced through this process. And I see when I get back from a Connectathon, and the tickets they're talking about, these JIRA tickets, and going through and analyzing them and seeing the great work that real life testing brings about within the lifespan of an implementation guide. So it's pretty substantial.
So one of the things to just keeping an eye on our time here, there's a question that came in via chat, via the question and answer, where someone's interested in the scenarios where they might get a resource that they access at the Connectathon, but something that's happening with pilot hospital facilities maybe in a separate environment. And that's why connecting ahead of the Connectathons and following up afterwards as well is very important, because these testing environments can become pretty particular. As Kyle mentioned a moment ago, there's different versions of the implementation guide. There are different versions of the FHIR resources that are used in implementation guides. And this is just a natural result of how health information technology is continuing to improve and evolve. And so it's really important that if there's a particular hospital facility pilot environment that you need to use, that you and your testing partners connect ahead of time and ensure that you have the access and the connectivity that you need. If you can do that from your respective work locations ahead of time, when you get to the Connectathon, the things provisioned for you at a Connectathon include Wi-Fi access and internet access. So making sure that you have the right security settings ahead of the Connectathon to work through your organization's firewalls as well as over the general internet, something that can carry over to when you're in person at the Connectathon and want to finish testing things, as well as when you leave the Connectathon and come back to your home organizations. Jeff or Kyle, do you want to add anything about that
Yeah.
particular scenario?
Yeah, in terms of what resources are actually available, for Epic in particular, Connectathon testing I'm actively doing for, say, CRD is using a dev environment that's ahead of release. So that's, specific to the Connectathon. We also have a sandbox environment available that is tied to the current release. And then when you start going to actual hospital sites, we release quarterly, and they might be a year behind, right? It's up to them when they decide to update. So it's definitely good to be aware of those differences.
And while I think that both Mike and Kyle spoke to most of the points that I would bring up, I would like to add too that this is something that also is addressed during these preliminary preparatory steps that we have, these meetings in between Connectathons, where we're not only discussing testing scenarios, but exactly what data we will be using and what the expectations are around that. So a lot of thought goes into that.
Yeah, one of the other things too that maybe we didn't hit on specifically because we're so familiar with this environment ourselves is that it is very much like a hackathon kind of environment at the Connectathon, but it's really specific to FHIR implementation and the development of apps and APIs. So a lot of people come to the event already having developed maybe a minimum viable product of an app or the basics of an API. And there's actually a pretty broad spectrum of folks that come, some that have a lot and some that have a little. So there's usually always an opportunity for whatever you're coming with at whatever level of expertise that you have, accomplishment that you have with FHIR, that you'll find someone that you can test with. And certainly to make the most of it, reach out ahead of time when you're planning your trip to the Connectathon, so that you can make the most of it.
And I would like to add on to that, Mike. I think that's such an important point that we will have a lot of variation in terms of people's exposure and expertise with these technologies that are being involved, primarily FHIR. And don't let that be a hindrance. If you're wanting to join in and contribute or observe even, there's going to be many people there that are more than happy to help support, help educate along the way, because the more that everyone in this process understands and knows is going to actually benefit all these use cases combined. So don't let that be any kind of hindrance or something that intimidates you. I know it's hard not to be, but realize that that's what we're wanting. Is we're wanting people to reach out. We're wanting people to ask the questions, because asking questions gives us a fresh set of eyes sometimes too, and that allows us to see things from maybe a different perspective than we were looking at before. So it's always valuable.
Yeah, the Connectathon environment is really one that is self-guided. So you show up ready with what you've got, knowing that you're going to connect with the people that you're going to connect with, the systems you're going to connect with. And it's a great environment because without it being too crowded, there's a bunch of other people there that as you're testing steps 1, 2, and 3 with your partners X, Y, and Z. Other participants at the Connectathon, are there and can see what you're doing and overhear what you're doing and say, hey, you know what? I didn't know you were going to do that. We could try and test up or connect up and test right now too. So there's great opportunity to expand from what you originally planned to do. really make the most of the event. And what you take away from it and can continue to do outside of the event afterwards.
I really think that to kind of sum up what some of this these last few discussion points have been, is that you should feel free to come, free to observe, free to participate, join in the discussions, offer up, learn from it. But also, if you want to, I think it's very beneficial to take on some of the basics that we're going to be dealing with as we're looking at some of these resource links right here on the screen. If you want to advance your fire knowledge, there's plenty of opportunities available for that. Again, I really want to stress the public calls we have for specific use cases. They're all very educational and very open for everyone to come in and begin that process. So there's foundational pieces like the fire knowledge that will put you a few steps ahead if you kind of brush up on that a little bit as well. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, so seeing that we've got a few minutes left, I'd like to call out the resources, the links on the page that we're showing now, and the link to the burden reduction track, the second link, is actually one of many links on the Connectathon page for this coming May, and you can navigate in Confluence to see what other tracks are there that might be more relevant to the work that you're doing with FHIR. There's a really broad set of tracks there, and while many tracks do repeat across Connectathons, not every track will be at every Connectathon. So the Confluence resource there also gives you a way to look back over past Connectathons and see what other tracks have been there as well. There's a first-time attendee video that is also linked here. If you're new to Connectathons, even if you're not new, maybe it's something to share with others in your organization to help them understand what a Connectathon is. And several other resources there. Zulip is also a chat, an online chat feature that people can ask questions on, and others in the community that are on the Zulip chat can respond to. So there's several threaded discussions that happen out there. And then, so we've taken some questions so far. With a few minutes left, maybe we could take one or two more, and then what I'll do is ask Alex to jump in and wrap us up.
Well, I'm really grateful you have been answering some questions along the way. You've woven them into your discussion points, or you've been able to actually type an answer and send that out to the audience. I think there's some really good factoids in what you and the responses that you've provided in your written responses to the questions that have come in, specifically to make sure that folks are recognizing that there's an HTI1 ONC rule. That's a health data technology and interoperability rule, and it has some details related, a lot of details, but it really speaks to the reference to moving to a newer version of the US core profiles that's tied to the United States core data for interoperability version 3, and that works synergistically with the CMS 0057 rule that has a later compliance date. So they really are working in tandem, although HTI1 comes out from ONC and 0057 came out from CMS and is tied to their regulated payers. So this is a part of our federal partners moving the needle forward on interoperability with their various levers. So you should probably be very familiar with both of those roles if you're diving into the deep end of the pool here with us. They will really help you in understanding a lot of what we're doing and why we're doing it, sort of activities above and beyond the impetus from a number of accelerators, which is the ability to chart forward their own course using the FHIR standard to meet their business needs. And you heard Mike make a comment earlier It's not just about the compliance floor. It's what you can do above and beyond with the FHIR standard for moving clinical data and really meeting your various needs, as we're doing in Da Vinci for value-based care. But we also see other accelerators advancing it, like Helios for public health or Gravity for social determinants of health, just to name a couple of, I think there are about 8 of them currently. We also heard, I think it was Kyle, who did the UDAP shout out. So the FHIR at Scale Task Force, or FAST, is another accelerator, and they're really thinking more about the super information highway that gets us to a scalable approach for harnessing the power of FHIR, whereas a lot of the other accelerators are really thinking about the cars that would, or the payloads that would traverse those pipes. And so some folks are actually thinking about UDAP is not only a security mechanism, leveraging the FAST security IG for their trading partner sort of exchanges, but also even from some internal perspectives or internal security aspects. And you can certainly learn more about that at FAST's May 30th FAST Focus webinar. But I think it's important to highlight Kyle's point that as a part of testing at this upcoming Connectathon, the added value of the bonus testing opportunity of using a UDAP security in the other tracks is a really new initiative, and really is showing how we're having cross-accelerator interplay, really trying to move the whole ecosystem, because it does take a village to develop standards, to test them robustly, and then make sure that they're ready for use by all of us, and bringing software to life, more especially to update and modernize our workflows so that we can have less burden and highest capacity use of all of our precious resources.
And Alex, if I could just add quickly, it may scare off some people with the amount of jargon and acronyms that we use. But one of the great things about where we are with FHIR and with Connectathons at this point, some years down the road from when these things first started, is that there are online resources that we've highlighted along the way here today that you can go and find out for yourself, and do your preparation so you can come to the Connectathon environment, talk to other people intelligently, and at the same time, none of us can know everything about this. And by coming together, we fill in each other's gaps of knowledge and understanding and capability, so that if there's something you don't know when you get to the Connectathon, it's a really welcoming community to help you understand and fill in those spaces. So that's why folks like Kyle and Jeff and I and countless others that you don't see here today in front of you have really benefited from the Connectathon experience.
I think it's important to tiptoe into the waters and know that the community will be warm and welcoming, and that if you aren't fortunate enough to have a travel budget to support you to go to Dallas in May for the Connectathon, there is a free Connectathon in July from CMS, and then there will be ongoing Connectathons in September and in January for HL7. So keep an eye out for those. So you can dip your toe in the water and join us where you can, and you can leverage the freely available resources and materials from HL7's Confluence website. We have put out a number of links. We will have the slides and the recording from today's webinar posted tomorrow to the Confluence in approximately the same place that you registered to attend today, and hope you'll follow up and also share this information with your colleagues. Use it as an opportunity to start discussions around how you're going to ensure that you are compliant in the next couple of years, as we all work towards ensuring that interoperability can happen across the various information exchanges, whether driven in an EHR environment or from our impacted payers, as CMS has been encouraging. With that, we are a few minutes over, so I'm going to call the question for today and thank our esteemed presenters for coming and sharing years of knowledge and experience in a very down-to-earth kind of way, and look forward to seeing you at our next community roundtable, which will be May 29th, the 5th Wednesday of May, and hope you all have a great rest of your day. Thanks.
Thank you all. Thank you, Alex.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.